Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Unspoken Truth and the Unscheduled Live for the week. We were only going to go live once a week. That was the battle rhythm that Ed and I were getting into, but this is such an important topic that we couldn't let this go by. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob Bruss, and I'm joined by my good mate.
Edward,
good mate.
Yeah, coming up, I didn't know. So that's what we're doing now, huh? Yeah, Ed Anderson here, folks.
So Ed's there in Minnesota, and we're going to be discussing some really cool stuff today. Folks, if this is your first time here at the Unspoken Truth, welcome. It's great to have you here. And if you're back for more, welcome back. And thank you for your ongoing support. We'd love to know your thoughts and opinions today, especially as we think that this is probably the most important topic in human history. Or maybe it's just a giant distraction. I'd love to know what your thoughts are in relation to that as well. You've got to be careful of what you're getting distracted by, especially by deep state. One thing is for absolute certain is it's the biggest cover-up in human history. There is no doubt about that. So we are, of course, talking about the subcommittee on unidentified aerial, or it used to be unidentified aerial phenomenon, but it's unidentified anomalous phenomenon. So the nomenclature has changed a little bit. So yesterday there was a subcommittee hearing on UAP, and there's 4 real points that need to be covered in that hearing, and that we'll cover off on here for you today. So the hearing went for 2.5 hours. I watched the whole thing for you, and I created a few videos for you, so you don't have to do that. You don't have to watch it. So I'll bring you up to speed with it. But essentially what they were wanting to do that is because the people that are in charge, the congressmen and women and the senators that are in charge, they can't seem to get any access to anything to do with these UAPs, despite their existing security clearances. So that was part of the hearings. Like, who do we ask? Where's this from? Like, how come that no one's giving us access? What's the story here? The American public have a right to know. So there was a large percentage of the time spent talking about that. The other one was there was no clear reporting system for the military or for civilian pilots in anything that they actually saw. And all 3 men are now on the record with their sightings and some of their stories as well. And I'm going to summarize the points from the hearing for you. So to start off, I want to say that there's some pretty amazing stuff they were talking about, Ed. You know, the first thing is there's been an admission by David Grush a couple of months ago now, it's about 2 months ago, that we have downed alien spacecraft. And he admitted yesterday that he hadn't seen anything and he'd never seen a UFO. But he was the person in charge of the program that was responsible for all of that. And so he's looking at all the documents saying that we have downed craft. So everything from Roswell in between seems to have been true. Everything from Project Blue Book seems to have been true. And I don't know about, what do you think, Ed, when you hear that? You think, yeah, of course it was. It was true the whole time, or what do you think?
Okay, well, like you, I also believe that this should be the most important story that's ever been broken in humankind. Forget modern history, just ever, if it's true. And otherwise, it's just a big nothing burger. It's another shiny object for the powers that be to keep us distracted from other things going on in our lives. And so far, and this is what I predicted would happen. This is end up being, for me, this was a nothing burger. This was okay. So David Grush says, "Yeah, I've seen all the material. I was in charge of the program." But well, have you ever seen the craft yourself? No, but I've read papers of people who saw it. I mean, come on.
You're not buying it.
I'm not buying it. Look, I'm happy to be convinced. I'm happy to be open-minded. Yeah. But the more that they pull shit like this, where they promise us that we're finally going to get the smoking gun, the more, this is the second time in 2 months that they've done this, where we're going to have the big reveal. The big reveal is finally going to happen. We're finally going to have actual first-hand evidence. What do we get? We get a guy who said, well, no, I haven't seen it, but I've talked to people who've seen it. Come on. No, I don't believe it. In addition to everything else, you have the government is famous for not getting anything right. Are you going to tell me that they successfully kept this
No,
secret
the
for
government
40
didn't
years.
do it. That's the whole point, right? And Dave Grush talks about that a little bit in some of the
Okay.
interviews. So I'll cover off some of the points there that they
All right.
went through. There's no point in putting all of it up there. I just got the highlights for you because some of it's like pretty boring. But to your point, Ed, there's a lot of the people that are on the committee are sitting there saying, well, you know, I went to these places. I went and they like, what are you talking about? There's nothing here. And there is nothing there. And one of the key points that David Grush said that was just, it's just such a fast thing that he said. And who do we ask? Are they people in the military or out of the military? And he said, in and out, like that. So it's people that are still there and people that are not there. And one of the key things that was discussed there, and they kind of pulled on that thread for a little while, was that the Pentagon has never ever passed a budget assessment. So we're going to audit you. We're going to audit your budget. What's going on? And they've never passed ever. And so one of the questions that was put to David Grush, because he was in charge of that program, was their funds being misappropriated and misallocated? And he said, well, I can't talk about that in public. I can talk about that in a SCIF. But here's the rub about all this SCIF bullshit. And if you don't know, folks, SCIF is a secure facility where they can talk about whatever they want. Because David Grush is no longer in the military, he no longer holds the security clearance. So for him, what he needs to do is to be very careful what he can and can't say about what he has and hasn't seen. So there's very few things that he can really disclose to anybody that's out there, but they wouldn't allow him to go into the SCIF and give him the temporary security clearance he needed to disclose everything that he knew. So that sounds like a little bit of a cover up there to me as well, rather than an administrative bureaucracy that's going on. In my view, when it's pretty compelling when you sit there and watch it for a couple of hours. It goes for two and a half hours or something like that, and I watched it at 2 speed, so it's like only an hour of my time. But it's pretty compelling when you listen to these people, and the senators and the congressmen, they all have the same sorts of questions. They're in the same vein. And in my view, this is kind of the day of real disclosure. Everything that Stephen Greer has done up until now seemed to pale into insignificance with this, because one of the people on the committee said that one of the things that would happen as a result of this is that they would create and pass legislation. So, like I mentioned there in the opening, one of the biggest problems that they're suffering from is that there's no clear reporting system for military or civilian pilots. And the best thing that you could do as a pilot if you have an encounter like this is to shush, be quiet, forget about it, and don't mention it again, because it'll damage your career. But there was a bunch of people there talking about why it was bad. So the guy on the left in this picture here, his name is Ryan Graves. He's a former F-18 pilot. Guy in the middle, David Grush, and Dave Fravor on the right, of course. So Ryan Graves was talking about the training facilities that they had in the southern part of the United States, and they had to put into the NOTAMs and brief on a daily basis about what they were encountering. And so the picture, or the little square cube above the picture of the fellas there, is what they were encountering. So here's the full picture. So they'd go out flying in their F-18s and do their training sorties, and they would encounter these black cubes which were surrounded by a white sphere floating in space. And that's his description of it, and I'll show you a video of how he actually describes that and what that actually means. And I look at all that and I sort of think, well, you know, what does any of that mean? You know, what could that be? But the reality is, if it's ending up on a NOTAM, and before you go flying, whether you're a private pilot like me or you're a military pilot, one of the things that you do is you look at the NOTAMs. And NOTAMs are notice to airmen about things that are going on. So as a private pilot, there's NOTAMs around here all the time, relating to military activity. They're relating to a whole series of different things, relating to the airport that you're taking off and landing from, and particularly relating to airspace in relation to the military, because sometimes the military will activate airspace in a certain part of the country that is not normally military airspace, and they might use it as a transit lane. There's a whole bunch of things that they can do with it. But these guys were conducting training missions, training sorties, and they were putting on the NOTAMs that these things were out in the area. They didn't know what they were. And there was one point in the hearing where he talks about they were in the corridor of in and out. So where the jets were departing, they were departing like via an air lane. These things were sitting right there. And one day on the way in, they were sitting right there, and one of the jets had a really close encounter with them, within sort of 50 meters of one of them. And if you know anything about aviation, if you get up close and personal with something like that, it can be very, very dangerous because the speed you're moving and you just can't make a mistake and things like that. So, they're tracking in back towards the airport where they're going to land, and all of a sudden there's something just in their way. Like, what is that thing? And go past it at, 400 knots or something like that, and it's just sitting there stationary. Like, what the hell is that? What was that? And so Ryan Graves is in the ready room after this guy has landed, and what happened, and he talked to him and spoke about it. So he was trained as a safety officer by the United States Navy, and when he got out, he's like, well, why don't I just use these credentials and create this thing? And that's part of the reason that he was pulled in front of this hearing in this committee. But look, when you look at the little square thing here and what it is, I don't know, what the hell is that? Is that a cargo pod or something like that they're using? Dave Fravor went into his detailed description about the Tic Tac. You've heard that story before, and you've seen these videos before. I've got that for you as well, which is kind of cool. So if you haven't seen this and caught up to it, let me just play that Tic Tac video because I think it's relevant to the discussion that we're actually having. 1 second, let me just get rid of that image and bring it back. So if you haven't seen this before, it's pretty interesting.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotating.
I remember when that first came out in 2016, and I remember hearing Dave Fravor on the Fighter Pilot podcast, right? And he was telling the story of that. And I could just remember just being completely gobsmacked, and I couldn't believe it. And a lot of people are saying, why can a Russian Sukhoi jet fly near one of our drones? This is a question that was asked yesterday. I thought it was pretty funny. And we can have crystal clear pictures of these Russian fighter jets, but we've just got grainy footage of this. And I thought, that guy's channeling Ed. and he's asking the question that everyone wants to know. Why can we have such high definition, high resolution of a JDAM hitting a building, and it's crystal clear as if I'm right there, but all I ever get about UFOs is grainy black pictures. And the reality is that what you're looking at here is from 2004. This is old footage, right? So you'd be forgiven for thinking, you'd be forgiven for forgetting that the quality of what we have today is incredible. Just our ability to stream live now and be in HD is not like anything in human history, right? It's like really, really crazy in that respect. So they talked about these videos, and these videos, as Dave Fravor describes them, are the most famous UFO videos in history. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of the footage that we see is like this footage on the screen now. It's like, well, yeah, you locked it up and it looks like a light in the sky. But I lie in bed in the morning and I can look out the window and I can see, when it's still dark, I see white lights flying through the sky as well. They're not UFOs. They're airplanes with anti-collision lights. So that's why this is maybe some of the most credible stuff that's out there. And if you look at it, he's got the way the flare is, he's got black on white, that's the setting, or you have white on black and it's trying to pull the heat out of it, but there's no heat, but there's like the radiance around it, and then it moves. Have you ever heard the stories from Bob Lazar? So Bob Lazar is the fellow who worked at Area 51 or Sector 7 or whatever the hell it's called, right? I can't remember, that's from Transformers, Sector 7, whatever area that he worked in. And he talked about how the spaceships, they don't take off and fly in a straight line. They take off vertically, but then they rotate and they fly forwards like that. And that's the way the anti-gravity technology works. And he'd said that a long time ago in the early 1990s when he first came out, or late 1980s, whenever he said that. I remember watching videos about him describing how they actually fly. And when this video came out of Dave Fravor showing the thing pretty much stopping in air, rotating, and then off it goes, it's pretty amazing corroboration of two completely separate people from really a decade or so apart. It was pretty interesting. So this is the video that Dave Fravor took, and this is what Bob Lazar was saying, that these things don't fly in a straight line like we think of an aeroplane flying in a straight line. They take off and they're orientated the right way, but then they stop and then they rotate in the air, and that's actually how they move forward. And if you look closely at that video, you can see it rotating like that. What do you think, Ed, when you watch these videos, man? Do you think that's real? Is it credible? What do you think?
Well, I think it's cool. Listen, I would like it to be cool, real. You know, there is that Star Trek part of me that would love to see this actually turn out to be, you know, real stuff. So I'm cheering for these guys, you know, that this is real. But give me some actual evidence. I'm sorry, this is not.
What's
really,
that?
Oh, that's not okay. It's a grainy footage as far as that goes. That little dot there, since it doesn't move at all, it might be a smudge on the camera, as far as I know.
That's some healthy skepticism right there, my friend.
Anyone take their finger and wipe that little portion of the lens
on the floor?
Yeah. I mean, I want it to be real, but after all this time, this is the best evidence we have. Come on, guys.
Well, apparently not. Apparently not, right? So Ryan Graves said that he was going to give all the details in this gift to all of those people. Okay. So show us then.
Okay, let's talk about that for a quick second, and then I don't mean to step on your point. But okay, so again, this was sold to us as another big reveal. We're finally going to get the answer. We're finally going to hear from the horse's mouth. And this is 2 months in a row that we've had this, where we were promised, you know, this is it. This is going to lay everything to rest. We're going to have actual proof, and then we get that more than I can tell you, but then I got to kill you. For crying out loud, either give us actual proof or shut the fuck up, because all you're doing is prolonging. You're just damaging. This whole you're turning into, this might be all true, but you're damaging your prestige, your believability by pulling this crap of, well, I cannot really answer that question, because if I do, someone's going to put a bullet in the back of my head when I leave the room here.
And it goes to the very heart of that. You would have heard it before that it's just an overclassification of everything in the government. Not just in the military, but just in the government in general. Yeah. So tell me what you think about this, because one of the people in the committee yesterday kind of asked the question, words to the effect of, why does it even need to be classified? Like, it's not like we have this technology and we're disclosing what we can and can't do with the technology. Even if we had the technology, we're not going to disclose what we can and can't do with it. We've just got it. So why can't the American people can handle that? Why can't we just see it? And it was a fair question. And everybody on those three guys, those three men were like, yeah, we don't see why there's a reason why that shouldn't be classified.
Okay, but some person had to have classified all this information, right? And there are probably several people over the years that classified. Oh, nope, that's got to be classified. Well, if any of them are still alive, why don't we find that person, put him in the chair, and ask him why it has to be classified?
They did.
How difficult.
They did. Watch. So Dave Fravor, he's the guy who. So they asked him some questions. He's actually a really funny sort of character, right? They said, "Did you report this when you saw it?" And he goes, "Yeah, I reported it." And he goes, "Who did you report it to?" And he goes, "Well, I told my boss." And he said, "But I was the boss," because he was the commanding officer of the squadron, right? So he's the one in charge. And then the person asking the questions is asking words to the effect of, well, did you get together with the captain and the admirals and the other people there? And he's like, no. And, well, what did they do with your report? Well, they took the report, I wrote it all down, and they just filed it away, and it just went away. And it's as if they forgot about it. And I remember hearing him on another podcast one time saying that the reason that it took such a long time for it to come out is because it was 2004 and they were in the workup phase to go overseas. So these men and women that are in the workup phase, and I know what that's like in the Navy, right? The only thing you're concentrating on is your job. And there happens to be UFOs out there, and you're like, well, are they a threat to us? No. Are they interfering with us? Well, kind of, sort of, not really. We've got shit going on over here, so that's over there. We're like, what do you want me to do about it? Because no matter what, I better get my head in the game, because if I don't have my head in the game and something goes wrong, I'm going to be killed on the battlefield, right? So that's part of the reason why it was sort of it's not swept under the carpet, but it's like, well, what do you want us to do about it? We're busy over here. We're going anyway, so we better get ready and get going. So let me play a couple of videos from the actual hearing itself, some shorts, and let's get some reaction to that because I think it's pretty cool. But before we do that, so we know that, just let me fiddle with the screen here for a second. We know that Dave Fravor saw this Tic Tac, and that's the video that we just watched, which in my view doesn't look like a Tic Tac. It looks more like the UFO style thing that you actually see, like you think of a flying saucer.
It's like the Batmobile. It's like the Bat.
Yeah, exactly right. It definitely doesn't look like that. When he describes the Tic Tac, what he describes is they're flying over at 20,000 feet and they look down, and as they look down, that's what they see. And they see this thing that's kind of agitating the water. There's no rotor wash, there's no propulsion system, and then it comes up to meet them. But then you see something that's slightly different in the video here as well. And I just kind of scratch my head and go, well, you know, what's happening there? What's going on there? But then Ryan describes that's what he sees. So as you're listening to what they're saying, just remember what the visuals are, because I think that's kind of an important point here with this. All right, so let's play the first one where they ask, is this actually a threat to us?
No question. Based off of your own experience or the data that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs could be essentially collecting reconnaissance information? Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Grush?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Mr. Fravor?
Very possible.
Again, in the national security vein, is it possible that these UAPs would be probing our capabilities? Yes or no, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Grush?
Yes,
Fravor?
definitely.
Is it possible that these UAPs are testing for vulnerabilities in our current systems?
Yes.
Yes, possible.
Do you feel, based off of your experience and the information that you've been privy to, that these UAPs provide an existential threat to the national security of the United States? Mr. Graves?
Potentially.
Yes, sir, potentially.
Same answer, potentially. Yeah, I'd say
Fravor.
definitely, potentially.
So
Okay, can I make 3 observations before you take in there? Okay,
before you go, let's just set the frame. What they're doing is they're setting the narrative. That's the narrative. Go ahead.
okay. Observation number 1. Okay, biggest story in history, right? And they've got this collection of these junior senators nobody's ever heard of. You know, they should have the big fucking guns there asking these questions.
Yeah, good point.
And so, do you think this could be a threat to our national security?
Yeah, he's pretty soft about it, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah,
like his body language, and it's like a little lollipop softball he's giving to you. Yeah.
And then the responses were, well, yeah, maybe. I say, fuck yeah.
Let me give you some context of the softball though.
Where is the sense of urgency about how big this story is? Come on,
There isn't
guys,
any.
sell it. Make me believe it.
So a little bit more context is a little bit earlier in the hearing. So Dave is kind of describing what he saw and how it happened, and I'll show you that video in a sec. But what essentially what he's saying is, and Ryan talks about it as well, where there was a couple of times where they flew out to the range and they can see these things with their radar, but then they try and lock them up with their radar and then they get jammed. So what I know from just being in the Navy, right, because I was a radar operator, if somebody jams you, it's actually an act of war. You're not allowed to jam somebody. You're not allowed to jam somebody else's equipment or because it's a safety hazard, and particularly in aircraft or particularly in aircraft launching from an aircraft carrier. You're not allowed to jam them because now I can't see where they are, and there's a whole range of things that can go wrong in relation to that. So these UAPs are jamming the fighter jets, which is an act of war. And the way Dave Fravor describes it, his body language is kind of, they ask a question and, you know, how do you feel? Can they outmaneuver you? And he's like, yes. How do you feel about that? And he's kind of like, well, that's pretty disheartening. That's the language that he uses, right? That here I am, I'm the Top Gun F-18 Super Hornet pilot and nothing can beat us. And he's pretty much right. Pretty much nothing can beat him. But then all of a sudden you've got this thing that can just run circles around you. And one of the questions that was asked for him, I don't have it in the video here, but is if you had weapons, would you have been able to engage it and shoot it down? And he said, no, probably not. And the guys asked him, well, why not? And he said, because they just would have moved away. So when they flew the intercept on the Tic Tac flew away, and then somebody on the radio from USS Princeton called him, like the controller called him and said, you're not going to believe it, but the thing is 60 miles away at your IP. So it had gone 60 miles in like less than a minute.
1 minute.
So do the numbers on that. You can see that this thing is moving at hypersonic speeds. And so Dave is saying that there's nothing that we have in material science today or in human engineering that could survive that type of G-force. So what's really going on here? So that's kind of the context of why they're saying it's a threat. And that's maybe a bit of context to the softball that fella's thrown at them, well, based on what you kind of saw, is it a threat? Yes or no? And yeah, that's what they're saying.
All right. So you have these pilots telling their stories, and they seem like reasonable guys. They're compelling, right?
They are.
This is Dr. Greer. When you hear it's compelling. They're believable people. Okay. So these pilots witnessed whatever they saw, and they believe their eyes. And these sightings, they've gone back to at least to World War II during the Foo Fighters, right?
If you look in the Bible, they go back thousands of years, and before that as well.
So, but just in the modern era, we've had pilots reporting alien aircraft at least since early 1940s. Well, okay, so you got those guys telling their stories. I saw this with my own eyes. I saw this with my own eyes. I saw this on the radar. I can't explain this. I can't explain that. That's one side of the table. The other side of the table, which is empty, are the guys who apparently have touched alien aircraft. They retrieved crashed alien aircraft with non-human beings. Okay, well, Mr. Goroshkinov, whatever your name is, you're in charge of that program. You never fucking thought, hey, boy, this is pretty cool. I'd like to go see one of these things for myself. You never thought you never thought of it. And if you did go try to see, what happened when you tried to see? Did someone stop you? Where was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the way that he described it in the hearing is that you'll have compliant and non-compliant people. And he goes, I'm going to give you a list of the compliant and non-compliant people. I'm going to tell you who to ask and where to look. And then you'll be able to get exactly what it is that you need. But to your point, right, this saying has never been more true in human history than at this hearing. That guy knows where the bodies are buried.
There you go.
He literally knows where the alien bodies are buried. Well, according to him, he does.
Wouldn't you have thought that he would have already provided this material to the committee before all this? He had to wait for them to ask?
He did. He'd spent 11 hours providing a whole bunch of stuff to people already.
Before the meeting? Before
this. So, but these people, I don't think he realized that these people didn't have access to what he'd done before, because there was a question asked to him and he goes, I spent 11 hours with these people and these people already. And he goes, but I can provide you all that information as well. So,
okay. What a clown show. Okay. So again, they're going to have a congressional hearing about all this. And the chairman of the committee didn't think to ask for the material. Hey, I want to see everything this guy has. I want to see it all. And I want to give it to him.
That's actually how it played out. That's exactly what it is.
Before the hearing?
No. What you described is a clown show. That's how it played out. Yeah, everybody thinks that government is super efficient, but the government, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just run by people who are like, I never thought to ask him to get the documents before.
I promise you, if this were an impeachment hearing on Trump,
that'd be dialed in proper, man.
They would have been dialed in.
Would have been the most efficient lawyers you've ever seen in lawyer history.
Exactly right. Yeah. And one other thing, if you go back to that last picture you had up, where you show the committee room there.
With the one I'm about to share.
There you go. See, one empty chair, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Well, that's a tight shot. Most of it's empty, actually. It's just the top row that's full.
Again, if that were an impeachment hearing on Trump, they'd be standing room only.
Yeah.
So this is the most amount of enthusiasm they can generate.
Well, that's why that's why I think, is this all a giant distraction? Look over here at this pretend alien story while something else is going on over here and we're destroying the economy and we're about to roll out central bank digital currencies that nobody realizes is going to end the world.
Okay, so you're coming over to my side now, or is that you're just speculating that could be?
No, I think that's what it was the whole time. I think these people are credible and I think this thing is completely real. But I think that it's just not given the attention that it needs. When you look at the wide shot of the room, the whole room, even the press gallery is not completely full. There's like all the names that you find in this UFO industry, this ufology stuff, that they're sitting in the crowd because they want to know what's going on, because that's a big thing for them. But there's only the top row of senators and congressmen that are there, and then there's only 4 or 5 other people. And I saw a couple of people make some statements. It's really strange. There was one woman that made a statement about the Chinese spy balloon. She asked the guy one question and then cut him off, and then made a statement about a spy balloon and said, "Oh, you're back," saying that Joe Biden's incompetent or something like that. And I'm like, what's a spy balloon got to do with UFOs, man? Like, what are you talking about, lady? It's like really strange.
You get the sense that these congressmen and senators who were there, you felt like they got the short straw. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yep, I would agree with that sentiment. Absolutely. And I kind of like look at it, and you see the people that are sitting behind them, like the interns and their staffers and stuff. They're the ones that have written it. And when they're kind of like reading the questions, they're reading enthusiastically the questions like that, and then they get the answers, and they're like, "Oh, okay." It's like you've got nowhere to go with it, because I don't know. I don't have enough background in this thing to know. I don't know how to question this F-18 pilot or this colonel from the USAF. Like, I just don't know how to do it. Like, what are they real? The aliens are real. We've got them. Where are they? Well, I'll give you a list and I'll tell you where they are. Okay, cool. Can I see them? And they'll go and see them. They go, okay, cool. We got aliens.
So the conclusion that I have, I've got 1 or 2 conclusions. Okay, either these things do not exist and they know they can't prove it, and so every door they open is going to be a dead end. There is no, because there is no there. And it's just one big nothing burger, and it acts as a useful distraction for other things that they want to do.
We roll out this useful distraction when we're trying to, it's a tool.
That's right. So it's either that, or this thing is so huge and it's real, and the powers to be are determined to
minimize it.
That's right. And both of those scenarios could absolutely be true. So that's
at the same time as well. By the way, they could be true.
So I think, because I think you mentioned here, because we're talking off camera on this, because someone asked, well, do you think these people might have nefarious intent or hostile intent? What was the answer that he gave? Yes, certainly, or
so from the 3 men on the panel, the answer is yes, possibly, but the context of that is, if they were our adversary, could they have hostile intent and would they overmatch us? And pretty much the answer is yes, because we can't maneuver our machines like that, our aircraft like that. We can't do that. We don't have anything that can come from 80,000 feet in space, come down to 20,000 feet, wait there for 3 hours, and then go back up to 80,000 feet. Like, what the hell is that? We don't know what that is. And there's documented evidence of that from the USS Princeton, and there's eyewitness accounts of all of those things. So it could be, it's like a combination of all the things that you were talking about there, Ed. This is actually a real phenomenon. People are actually seeing these things with their own eyes. They're having these experiences. That's real. We do have crashed aircraft, but that is so big that every door you look behind, there's going to be nothing there, because it is such a big thing and it's been covered up for such a long time that the minute that it comes out and they have to come clean with us, all of a sudden it's like, you've been lying to us for 70 years. Since the end of World War II. And that's part of it, because it's such a big cover up and there's so much money that's gone to this thing to cover it all up that they're shushing it all up. But it is a real thing, because real people are seeing it all. Like, all of those things that we're talking about can be all true all at the same time, I think.
All right, so let's go to the nub of it. Let me ask you your personal opinion. Okay, you said earlier that that's why this is not a government operation. So what do you mean by that?
Well, Dave Grush kind of confirmed that it's people in and out of government that are actually operating this. So that's government that's funding it. And he described that it's a misappropriation of money. So there's money that's supposed to go to a program over there, but it actually goes to a program over here.
Okay,
That's what's
so-
happening.
So, okay, but this, for lack of a better phrase, I'm going to call it a program. It's just easier to talk about it as
Sure.
one idea. Okay, so this program, like you said, has been hidden for over 70 years, and yes, the odd story from pilots come out. Okay, they sneak out, but for every pilot who's telling you this story, there's got to be 100 who aren't, right? So we're getting a very small, the stories.
That's a fair assessment.
I would love to see. I'd love to hear a lot more of those stories. But then get down to the physical evidence. So if this has been going on for 70 plus years, well, over those years, untold thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people had to have had their footprint somewhere along the way in this guy. They knew a guy, or some guy actually held the records. Some guy,
The wrench,
the
screwdriver.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Bob Lazar. Yeah, that's one person that came out and did that. So he worked on them. So he said that. And I think there's two things here. If I could defend the government's position, which I would never want to try and do, but I can defend the kind of the idea behind it. And I think of the most advanced things that we have. So what are the most intricate and delicate and most advanced things that we have? There's satellites. Satellites sitting in space with these high precision optics that can look down on planet Earth and measure the gait of a human being and identify a human by their gait and how they walk, and then the E-Link capability that we have to be able to use a satellite to listen in to a mobile phone call, or to tap in where's his phone, who's he with, what's a supplier, reverse engineer his phone number and figure out all of that stuff from a satellite in space, right? The IT technology that we have is just eye-watering. It's incredible, that type of tech that's out there. And if you saw that for real time, Hollywood or not, what we have in real life from that surveillance technology is incredible. So then when you look at, that's like the most advanced thing that humans have. So then you look at the most advanced fighter jet in the world, the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35, you think, well, it's really not much different to the F-22 or to the F-18 or to the F-16 or the F-14, or I can just go back through the fighter jets of the last 30 years. How much different is the F-35? Well, it has the most powerful engine. It's stealth. It has supercruise, sensor fusion, blah, blah, blah. But really, it still has wings and an engine. It still flies the same way. And if we've had these downed spacecrafts since Roswell, since the 1930s and before, and we've got ones that are older than that because they've been found in archaeology digs, the reason I believe that you don't see that technology today is partly because it is owned by these private companies that have it suppress it all, and that's the big giant cover-up and the
Right.
conspiracy. But more to the point of that, I believe that we don't have it and you don't see it in modern society is because our material science can't work it out, because it's beyond the scope of what we know. If we had it, imagine if you rewound the clock to 1850 and somehow you got hold of a Joint Strike Fighter. Somehow you walked outside into your farm and suddenly there was an F-35 sitting there. You'd be going, what is that? That's pretty cool, but what is it? But then if I showed you an F-16 Viper that was sitting right next to that F-35, you'd be like, oh my God, what is that? Your mind would be boggled by it. But in 1850, if we saw that F-35 and the material that it's made of, and when you see one of those jets up close at an air show, it's sitting on the apron, you think, how did that little jet make so much noise? It's incredible, right? Because it's got the most powerful engine that's ever been created in it. And it has all of this technology inside of it and stuff. And if you were from 1850 and you could sit in the cockpit of that and turn the APU on and put the helmet on and you could look around in the augmented reality and you could look through the jet, you'd just be like, these people are like gods from the future. And there would be no physical possible way that you could reverse engineer stealth technology in 1850. So what makes you think that if we had crashed spacecraft from the other side of the galaxy that we could ever reverse engineer something like that? Our material science hasn't caught up. Only this year have we got AI. And that's opening the door to all sorts of stuff. And that opening of the door is probably going to kill us all because the people that are running it are just so stupid and incompetent. It might destroy us all. You just don't know.
Well, look, whether we can comprehend the technology and really get some practical use out of it is one thing. But knowing that it actually exists so that we can make a determination about whether or not we're going
completely separate issues, aren't they?
Yeah. So why can't we at least get that little guy answered? right? I've seen reports of a guy say, "Well, yeah, there's this records that I held, and you could bend it. It was like rubber, but it was stronger than steel and stuff, like things that that you would not think would be imaginable, right? Well, okay, cool. Can I see it?
And I look under a microscope and I see it has layers of nano carbon fiber or some shit like that I've never heard of, and they're like, "What? How did they do that?" And that's what I'm saying. Even if we had the crashed spacecraft, like, show us, and then put it out in the open market. Let's see.
Let's get the first question answered first.
But I think if they show you the spaceship, man, you're going to look at it and go, "That's not real." Russia blew up their own pipeline, bro.
I would. It makes no difference what I think. We should get people who know about this. Who know to analyze it, and that'd be a great reality TV show,
wouldn't it? Yeah. Lockheed Martin opened the doors and come on in, PhD scientists. Show us what you got. We don't freaking know. We've been looking for 30 years. We don't know. Tell us what you can do.
Okay, so the threat that I'd heard coming into this meeting today was, well, listen, a lot of these companies out there, they've been making fortunes off of this technology over the decades because they kept control of it. They have access to, and so a lot of our technology today is derived from studying and reverse engineering the stuff that they whatever.
Yeah, that's valid. Hey,
right. So there is a deep state conspiracy here to keep this information private for the benefit of certain private corporations. So what we're gonna do, we want you corporations to tell us, to open your books and show us all your material. And if you don't, we're gonna cut you off from funding. We're gonna cut you.
Well, that's pretty much pretty much what they talked about in this hearing, right?
Okay.
And they pretty much said, we've gone and done that, and the people that we've asked are going, well, what are you talking about? And that's because so David Grush and Dave Fravor said, that's because you're asking the wrong people. And then and AOC, she even said, well, if you were me, where would you look? And that's when he goes, I'll give you a list. I'll give you a list of compliant people that will help you, and a belligerent group of people that won't help you. And just be careful, because
cool. Let's see if anything comes of that list. Let's see whether she gets anything and she does anything with it.
There's two separate issues there, isn't there? Here's the list, and she goes, "Hey, boss, I got the list. Yeah, that's good. Chuck it in the shit tin, and that's it."
I've got a list that could change the nature of mankind.
I saw a funny meme yesterday. It wasn't related to this, but it made perfect sense. The reason that they haven't investigated Epstein is because they don't want to investigate themselves. And it's like, well,
yeah,
that same thing holds true right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, and Hollywood and the subjects we're not allowed to talk about. There are topics out there that could that like mind blowing.
That's the electric fence that's going to zap you pretty hard. Yeah. Let's take a little look at. I've got two more videos for you. They're not very long, but let's have a listen. This is pretty cool what he talks about here, and Ryan talks about his sighting, which is kind of cool.
Gentlemen, let's talk about the laws of physics for a second. Mr. Graves and Commander Fravor, I heard you talk about speed. When those objects broke the sound barrier, did they make a sonic boom?
I was in a jet. You can't hear anything. It's kind of loud in there.
Yeah, you're not able to actually personally tell within the vehicle. I will say the objects that we were seeing, they were spherical, and they were observed up to Mach 2, which is a very non-aerodynamic shape.
What about G-forces? Let's talk about G-forces of those vehicles. Could a human survive those G-forces with known technology today?
No.
No, not for the acceleration rates that we observed.
Okay. What about what they look like? How close did you get?
So we got within a half mile at Tic Tac, which people say that's pretty far, but in airplanes, that's actually relatively close. No, it was perfectly white, smooth, no windows, although when we did take the original FLIR video that is out there, when you put it on a big screen, it actually had two little objects that came out of the bottom of it.
So that's what they look like, and that's what they're saying. And we got one more video here where Ryan describes an incident at Vandenberg Air Force Base. You might have heard of this one before, you might not have heard of it, so let's have a look.
in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Where's the video? Where's the video?
That's the first thing that I said as well. You're at Vandenberg Air Force Base where they launch freaking rockets. There's cameras everywhere. 2003 or not, there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah. Find some local kid with a cell phone. Let's see if he got put the word out and do a social, a social media search. Hey, does anybody have? You probably see all sorts of, in fact, if anybody in our audience has any personal footage of UFOs, could you please send it to us?
Let's see it.
Hey, let's see it, and would you be willing to come onto our show and let us interview you? Please.
Yeah, let us know your experiences with them. All right, Ed, I titled this live, Aliens Are a Real Thing.
Sorry to step on you again. I mean, Rob, you have a close encounter experience.
Yeah, I think I had a close encounter experience, but not with technology that we have, which kind of makes sense, not necessarily a UAP. And I'm, as a radar operator, I had that.
Tell your story. Tell a story, because it's a good story.
Well, we were at the northern part of the Persian Gulf, and there's only one waterway that goes into Iraq called the KAA, and we would sit. So there's an 11-mile exclusion zone. You can't go inside of their territorial waters, and we were enforcing. It was in 1996, right? So we're enforcing the UN sanctions against Iraq, which is the southern no-fly zone. So what happened after the war ended in 1991, Saddam went after all of the Kurds in southern Iraq because the Kurds were trying to establish their own place, which they have now in northern Iraq. But the Iraqi army went after them, and they used their air force and their helicopters to go after them. And the Allies said, no, you don't. You can't just go and do that. And we established the southern no-fly zone, which was just a line on the map, and the carrier jets would launch from there. The Allied Air Force, the F-16s and Tornadoes would launch from there down in Bahrain and down in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and they would fly all the way up the Gulf, and they would fly up and down this line, and they would drop bombs on anybody that was being a bit naughty there. So we were also required to enforce the sanctions on the water. That's what we were doing. So as the ships would come out of Iraq, they were not allowed to export oil. They were not allowed to do a bunch of things. But what would happen is they would come out and they would turn left, so to the east, and they'd stay inside of territorial waters, and they would try and hide in all of the Iranian oil fields. And then sometimes a ship would come alongside them. They'd offload their cargo, and then off you'd go. And you could watch them on the radar. You'd see them marry up and raft up next to each other, and they'd transfer their cargo. But then they would go around in a circle like this. You couldn't see them visually because all the oil fields were blocking you. Couldn't see them with a helicopter because they were too far away, and we couldn't go over there because they're inside of territorial waters. So they were doing illegal stuff, and every now and then one of these ships would try and bomb burst out of the territorial waters across to Bahrain or something, and that's when we would intercept them. But I came on watch one day, and I was sitting, we were literally just stopped in the water pointing at Iraq, and I dialed the radar out, and I could see, as the air search radar swept around, I could see a U-2 spy plane, and the U-2 spy plane is in the data link over, so that's how I saw it, right? So I dialed the radar out to 512 miles, and I could see the U-2, and I could see the U-2 at 82,000 feet on the transponder. I'm like, whoa, look at that. That's pretty cool, right? And what else could that be? That's the only thing it is, and it's flying around really slowly, so that's a U-2. So the spy plane doing surveillance and whatnot. And then as I dial the radar all the way out, I can see in the data link all the Aegis ships, right? So I can see the Ali Burkes, there's a Ticonderoga there, and there's the carrier, and there's a couple of other ships as well from allied nations, and you can see them in the data link. And they were tracking an aircraft that left Bahrain at high speed. And it flew all the way up from Bahrain over the top of the ship that I was on, at what seemed like 10 or 12 times the speed of sound. And I was like, what's actually happening here? So I'm tracking it on the radar, but I'm not tracking it with my radar. I'm tracking it via the data link, and those Aegis warships with their fancy Spire 1 radars were the ones that were tracking it. So it appeared to launch from Bahrain. That's what I remember. But I could be wrong. It could have been flying over the out of Saudi Arabia over the top of Bahrain and then turned left and tracked north up over the Gulf and stuff. Whatever it was moving at hypersonic speeds, and I'd never seen anything like that. And inside of a warship on a guided missile frigate, where on an American warship, on an Aegis warship, the combat information center is down. So you're kind of 2 levels down. So you're in the middle of the ship. On a guided missile frigate, old school Oliver Hazard Perry class frigate, you're up behind the bridge. So you're up. So when a jet flies past you, you can hear it. When you do an air defense exercise, when the helicopter launches, you can hear it. You can hear everything, right? Because it's kind of the bulkhead that's there. It's just like an inch of steel. So you can hear what's going on. This thing flew over at hypersonic speed. I didn't hear anything. It's like completely silent. And you know, I'd done air defense exercises with everything from F-111s to F-14s and F-18s and a whole bunch of things in between. So, you know, you would always hear them when they came near the ship, and this thing flew directly over the top of us and it was completely silent. Even if it was at altitude, you'd still hear something like that traveling along. You'd hear the sonic booms as it's coming and it's approaching you, but no, I didn't hear anything like that.
I love the story.
I'm not sure if it was a UAP. I'm not sure if it was something that we had. Could be SR-72, not SR-71. So, you know, there's a fictitious program out there called the Aurora program, but the SR-71 was replaced with spy satellites. And if you read the history of the SR-71 Blackbird, it was like just an absolute nightmare to maintain, to fly. It needed special fuel. There was all sorts of problems that it had associated with it, and it wasn't the right way to go and take photos of the Russians. The best way to do that is with satellites in space, and that's where they actually moved to, right? So, but there's a theory out there. Skunkworks created a thing called the SR-72 or the Aurora program, which was a hypersonic aircraft, very, very similar to what they depicted in Top Gun Maverick, where the Dark Star is like, he's at Mach 10, you know, that's the hypersonic thing. He's the fastest man on Earth, and that's how it is. That's the idea, right, of what the Aurora program was. And I remember thinking at the time, well, if that was the Aurora, that was like pretty a letdown. Like, I didn't see anything. It was a really fast plane that flew over the top of us, like, and took a photo as we're going. Like, so what? It's pretty funny. I don't know if it was a UFO. Maybe it was. Maybe it was the Aurora. Maybe that's real. No one's ever confirmed or denied whether Aurora was real. So I don't know.
Well, if you were single, yeah, it'd definitely be a UFO. That'd make a good story.
You know, when things.
But you're married, so it could be either one. Yeah.
So think of like when like these defining moments happen in your life. They're very short, right? You know, the time that how many times had I come on watch, and you know it's cold in the ops room, right? Because all the computers and stuff, and you put your jacket on, you're like, whoa. But it's like literally 50 degrees outside in the Persian Gulf, right? But I'm freezing cold in the air conditioning here. I'm like sitting at the console looking, going, what's going on? Try the radar out, what's happening? Where are the bad guys? Looking at the surface radar, looking at the air picture. What's that? So it really stood out, you know, like, because I was in the Navy for 5 years and just sitting at a console constantly doing that hundreds of times. And, you know, if you could ask me about 4 or 5 other things that I've done, I'd be struggling to tell you about some things. Maybe I could tell you about some anti-submarine warfare stories that I'd had, where I remember that we had a new warfare officer. He was a senior communications officer, the SCO, and he had absolutely no idea what he was doing when it came to anti-submarine warfare. And so the principal warfare officer's console sits between the air warfare officer, but he actually stands up. He doesn't sit down. So it's a big kind of stand-up desk, a big radar screen, and the anti-submarine aircraft controller, the ASAC, is next to him. And I was the action picture supervisor standing next to the warfare officer. So the warfare officer is driving everybody in the ops room, and I'm updating his picture, and I'm drawing with a greasy pencil on the screen saying where we are, we're firing torpedoes, this is what we're doing, this is how this is what we do. And I can remember a couple of times him going, where do you think the submarine is, Rob? And I'd be like,
I love it.
What did you say, boss? I have no idea where it is. Where do you think it is? I'm like, fucked if I know. Under the water? I'm just doing what you're telling me to do here. Like, what do you mean? Where would you put the helicopter? I'm like, and I draw the symbol for a helicopter over here and then point an arrow like that
You
on the
know,
screen.
military personnel, they have the best stories, right?
I don't have any war stories, man. I only got funny stories like that.
War stories, but just is it because some of the situations you find yourself in on a day-to-day basis are kind of like absurd.
Yes.
Right. You say you try to, because my son. I'll give this real quick. It is a funny story. So my older son, he owns a pizzeria right now in New York, Randazzo's Pizza, in case anybody is in New York there. But he went through officer training. He became an officer, and he was stationed in Tokyo for his first 2 years. And anyway, so one day he was the officer of the deck, and they're firing the guns. Every once in a while, they got to fire the guns to make sure the guns are working or whatever. And they had the large gun. I forget what the 5mm. I don't know what
5-inch gun. Yep.
5-inch gun. And he's on the bridge. He's overlooking them, and they shoot it, and the round wouldn't go out. So the round got stuck, in the barrel. So he had to call over to. Now he was on a not a destroyer. He's on a destroyer, right?
Destroyer.
He had to call over to the carrier so they could fly. They could helicopter out their DoD guys. The DoD guys come out there and they look at it. And they oh, so you got something stuck in the shell there, huh? And they're okay. They looked at it for a little bit, and they ended up grabbing like a broomstick and going to the end of the barrel, and they're shoving it in a live
I'm getting out of here, man, in case that round goes off, yeah?
a live round. And my son said, you can just feel everybody
tension.
Slowly step back,
Move away from the window.
Now, I'm sure those guys must have known what they're doing, I suppose. But just the image that they got a broomstick and they're shoving it, and that's their idea of fixing the problem of a very sophisticated. So that's an absurd situation, right? what other aspect of life? Where else in life are you going to come up with those kind of stories?
Well, the military, the way I describe it is it's like any other job. It has its ups and downs, it has its pros and cons, but the vast majority of what you experience in the military is just amplified because what you experience is like quite dangerous, and when things are dangerous, it's amplified. I remember, I'll close it out with one final Navy story for you. I remember we were off the coast of Townsville in a place called Shoalwater Bay, and we were waiting for an exercise to start. It's called tandem thrust, and at the time it was the biggest exercise that we'd ever created here in Australia. And what was happening was there was a carrier coming from Guam, and it was coming around the top of Papua New Guinea. And what we were going to do, they were the enemy, what we were going to do is sneak up the pointy bit of Australia, come around the bottom of Papua New Guinea, and as they came around the corner, we were going to flank them and engage them there because they wouldn't be ready for us to bounce them. And so as we're in Shoalwater Bay doing all the planning, getting ready to do all that stuff, this cyclone happens. So it was called Tropical Cyclone Justin, and it turned out to be the biggest cyclone in Australian history at the time. So it was a Category 5 cyclone. So the biggest as they get, and you see these documentaries on Netflix about all this sort of shit. It was worse than what you could ever possibly imagine. And we were like, oh, well, what now? Is the exercise cancelled? And I remember we went into Shoalwater Bay to get some protection because it's like nice and calm. And Shoalwater Bay, so the Australian coastline's this, and Shoalwater Bay kind of juts out like this, and you go in there. So it's really protected where it was, especially from the ocean side. You go all the way down the bottom. And I remember the pilot, his name was Nick Chapman. He flew the little battle budgie, the Squirrel. He launched the aircraft, and they were due to go flying that day that we went into Shoalwater Bay. And he thought, we'll just go flying anyway. And I remember doing the brief. And the helicopter came back. This is why I remember this. The helicopter came back, and it had lost the tail boom. So think of a helicopter has a tail rotor, and then the boom that sits on the tail rotor, the top of the boom was like gone. And I remember he launched when I was on watch, and I remember looking at the camera as the ASAC was bringing him back, and he was landing, and it was like vibrating, and there was some stuff going on in the radio. I wasn't really paying much attention, right, because it's just routine stuff. And then got out of the helicopter. Well, the helicopter shut down. He got out, and everybody like kind of on the flight deck camera, you could see them all the birdies came out there, and they're like looking what happened. And turned out he was actually doing low-level stuff, and he was under a power line, and he clipped the power line. Ooh. And nearly speared in. And I remember, because they came back up to the ops room, because they start and finish in the ops room, because that's where they brief and debrief the ASAC. The controller briefs them and debriefs them. We give them the weather and we talk to them and stuff, make sure they're good to go, they've got everything they need. And I remember he came back up to be debriefed, and I thought, oh man, this guy's like going to lose his job. He's in big trouble, right? And the skipper came down and he's like, righto, just go and get that fixed. Like, he just kind of like brushed it off. And he said, righto, there's been a whole bunch of emergency locator beacons that have gone off. We have to go and do some search and rescue. And everyone's like, what? Because we're expecting to go on an exercise. And none of us realized how big this cyclone actually was, because it was just developing. So there's a bunch of people coming from New Zealand to Australia in their sailing boats and making their way across the Tasman Ocean and coming towards like Queensland. So you could see, this is the tracking data where they were. Here's where the emergency locator beacon went off. Let's go and find them. And we had to go, came out of Shoalwater Bay, turned right and head east, but we're tracking into the developing cyclone. So as we're tracking for a couple of days, the swell starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it gets to that point where you've seen these YouTube videos where the waves are like 25 meters high, and you know, there's not much room between the waves. So the ship goes over one wave, comes down the other side, and there's another wave there, and it goes through the next wave like that.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, okay, I'd never seen anything like that. Back in the day, there was no YouTube, right? So I'd never experienced like that. And I'd been in the rough ocean before, but nothing like this, man. And a ship doesn't just go up and down. It goes like, it corkscrews around like this, and it goes all these different angles, and the stabilizers on the ship trying to keep it straight. And you sit in the cafe, and the chairs are not bolted down, like they're just kind of like plastic chairs, and you would slide over to the other side of the cafe, which is like 4 or 5 meters away. You'd eat like a piece of like a chip or something off someone else's plate. You'd slide back over, they'd slide back over, eat one off your plate, and that's how you kind of had dinner, right? It's kind of fun. But I remember coming on watch as we were tracking east, and this cyclone was probably, by that stage, it was about a category 4, hadn't quite made a 5, and it was tracking towards the Queensland coast. And I remember coming on watch thinking, I wonder if they'd found these beacons. Like, how are you going to find anything in this weather? And I thought, before I go into the ops room, so you go up the ladder on 02 deck, and you go behind the ops room, there's another ladder, and there's a bathroom, and you can come outside to go, or you can go outside into the bridge. And I went up there to where the bathroom was, and I opened the door, and I went, shit, and I shut the door straight away. I went back down, and I went up the ladder to go into the bridge. And as I went up the ladder to get into the bridge, I'm kind of holding on to the door, and I could see the ship like pointing to the sky. And as it's pointing to the sky like that, I'm going, what the fuck? And as it comes down, it just goes, and the water's like, this warship, and then the wave like swamps over, and I'm thinking, that's the biggest wave I've ever seen in my life. And the doors are dogged right down. The bridge wing doors are dogged right down. And the ship goes literally through this 20-meter wave, and all the water comes inside of like the doors, even though they're dogged, they're supposed to be watertight. And I'm like, I'm going back down to the ops room. I went back down to the ops room. Dangerous shit, man. Like, so, you know, we nearly lost the helicopter there. Helicopter nearly slid off the deck, nearly crashed. I remember we found 3 emergency locator beacons. No people. One of them was, I think, 4 people had gone missing. Another one was 2, and then maybe, I want to say, like a family or something like that. I can't remember exactly, 3 or 4 people or something like that. Like 7 or 8 people that had died in that, they just lost at sea like that. But we found the emergency locator beacon, and I remember getting on the other side of the cyclone, and the Pacific Ocean, man, it's like beautiful. It's like blue like my jumper, and it's calm, like glass smooth calm. And you would sit on the console, and the emergency locator beacon had like a radio that transmitted on guard frequency on 121.5 and 243. So you just dial the radio to that, and as the warship was steaming along, you'd be talking to the officer of the watch, and you go, come starboard 20, and the thing it would get louder in your ears because it was directional. Starboard 10, come port 10 degrees. There it is. And you kind of conning the ship. I remember conning the warship with my ears, listening to the ELT, and then somebody in the lookout going, oh, we got it, there it is. And then taking my headset off, like, and going outside, and somebody's reaching down with a hook, pulling the ELT out of the water. Going, there's the ELT. And then you kind of go, oh, well, where are the people?
Yeah.
No people. They're just all gone, and the ELT is just floating in the ocean in the middle of nowhere, right? And
if that were me, I would have strapped that device to my underwear or something, make sure that I was attached to it. I mean,
we got to wonder, right? Because it's on the boat or the small boat, the sailing boat, and gets washed off by a big wave or something like that, or the boat gets knocked over onto its side and then it rights itself and the ELT went in the water.
well, if a boat gets smashed to pieces.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only thing that's left. And if you're below deck, or even if you're on the deck, you get washed off. And
Okay, so a couple quick follow-up questions for you before you say goodbye here. All right, so this hearing, do you happen to know? I should know this because it's here, but is it over now? Was it just the one day, or is it going on?
Yeah, as far as I could tell, it was just one day. I've put the link in the description for everybody to see. The whole entire recording is there. It's on the channel already. If you want to watch that at 2-speed, you can see it. So, but yeah, to my knowledge, it was just the one day.
Okay, and so 2 final questions. So, do you think anything is are they going to follow up with these lists that they got?
Well, they were saying that they were going to try and get these guys in a skiff, but they said that access had been denied, and they were like stamping their feet, having a tantrum about that. So that would be the follow-up. But even if that happened, we would never know about any of that information.
Couldn't they just get
so the
Biden?
answer is no.
Couldn't they just get Biden? And I don't have to ask you this. I know the answer. They can just get Biden to declassify whatever he wants.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, right? But no, apparently not. So is there a follow-up? There would be, like, internally amongst those people, but I doubt that there would be a follow-up that we would have access to or we would be privy to. I don't think we'll see.
Okay, so we as a public, we haven't learned anything new. Not one thing new from all.
What we did learn is that all of it's on the record, and the person that was in charge, David Grush, is now on the public government record, not the media, because he did that interview, and Dave Fravor's done all the interviews, so is Ryan Graves. But it's on the public record, and it's in the public discourse. So one good thing that came out of it is
we haven't learned anything new.
Yeah, we kind of have. So we learned that Ryan Graves has set up that program where it gives pilots, both military and civilian, a way to report. And so that will turn into legislation and become part of the bureaucracy, which is... that's new. That's something that's new that's happened. That's not like disclosure or anything like that.
We haven't learned anything new about the existence of UFOs. We've heard about a new program that people can do a better job reporting.
That's just bureaucracy. That's new.
That's bureaucratic stuff. But we haven't learned any new news about the existence of UAPs or UFOs. Nothing.
No, I don't think so. Based on the testimony of those people, I didn't hear anything that I hadn't heard before. And I'm a pretty close follower of the subject and the topic. So again, I think maybe the last hour of this podcast has been a waste of time.
So it's been entertaining. So once again, one of my predictions came true. That this is
put up or shut up. Come on, man.
This is one big nothing burger. Nothing came of this, which is exactly what I predicted.
Well, let's conclude that it was a distraction.
Okay, so do you believe? Let's get you on the record. I have you on the record already a few times. But get on the record. Do you believe in UFOs?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And do you believe in aliens?
Yes.
Do you believe that aliens look like the guy in that footage that we saw unredacted the other day?
Unknown. The hypothesis is that there's multiple different versions of them. There's the shape-shifting reptilians that really run the world. Yeah, I'll say it out loud. I'll say the quiet part out loud that a lot of conspiracy theorists really believe. Then there's the Greys, and the idea of the Greys are us, and they time travel back, and that's what happens when you have too much technology. You desexualize yourself, you can't reproduce, and the Greys are here to try and figure out a way to actually reproduce back in their time, which is our future. And when you think about it, that has some plausibility to the hypothesis.
If I were a really brilliant guy and I was looking for a way to improve mankind, the last thing I would want to do is get rid of sex. I'd be looking for ways. I'd be looking for ways to have more of it. These guys must have been woke.
Well, that's where the woke agenda ends up. As a grey alien 500 years in the future, coming back time travel, trying to figure out how to save your civilization. That's the story, at least.
We just connected two big dots. The
woke and the aliens. There it is.
The woke and the alien. They're aliens. Alien technology.
There's the unspoken truth right there, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you, Rob. Always fun. So.
Always fun. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget we're available as a podcast over on Spotify and Apple. And make sure you come on over to Telegram and the Twitter and give us a follow there as well. Don't forget, all of the links are down in the description below, and you can watch the full committee hearing in the link in the description below as well. All right, Ed, let's get out of here, mate. I'll see you next time.
All right, see you.